Hey there, guys. Alright, today we are back with some more Vati, and this time we are doing the lore regarding Mikola. The lore of Elden Ring's slumbering demigod. I feel like it's a good time to go ahead and watch this one before, at least, I don't know if I'll be up. I'm sure this will get uploaded before the DLC releases. I don't know. I'm not sure exactly how this is gonna be timed. But yeah, watching this at the very least before the DLC releases. I am not playing the DLC. I currently do not have the funds to afford the DLC, so this is where we're at. We're going to be watching this video. But yes, I'm I will have this up the entire goddamn video. I fucking did it, bitches. 100%ed. Now, of course, I know Elden Ring is probably the easiest of the From Software games to 100%. It really actually wasn't that difficult. I thought it was going to be a lot tougher to do. Like specifically with the 100%ing the armaments and shit. I thought I would need to grab like 30 fucking armaments. No, just need to grab like 7 armaments or whatever. Like 7 talisman, like each one was like just a few, like a handful. So that actually wasn't that bad, and most of them I had already picked up. Um, uh, and then for the Frenzied Flame ending and the Elden Lord ending, those are up on my YouTube, on my VODs channel. You can go watch my playthrough of those. I just did New Game Plus for both of those and essentially speed ran it and just focused entirely on doing Frenzied Flame and then Elden Lord, which, by the way, guys, I have an update regarding my feelings towards Elden Ring, and it kind of goes into it does connect with what the gripes I had with Elden Ring in my first playthrough of it. When I focusing entirely just on um the Frenzied Flame and then Elden Lord ending. So I didn't really interact with anyone outside of those like necessary quest lines. So for Frenzied Flame I interacted with um really only interacted with, well, in both of these only interacted with Melina. Um in Frenzied Flame I also interacted with the woman you feed the Shibiri grapes to. So I also ended up doing the quest that is to the south, where you go to that one portal where they're with the daughter and father. Um, but what I came away with is that I'm someone when it comes to stories, I need there to be character. I need to be connected to the characters. With Elden Ring, as it is designed in its open world and quest design, you get very sparing character interaction, which is of course purposeful, right? But for me to really connect with the story and like love it, I need more character interaction than what Elden Ring gives if you play it as how I like to play my open world games. It does not provide that. One way I consider like the way to essentially fix this issue, if it's something you want to fix, right? Every storyteller has different goals with what they want to do with their stories. Is look at Skyrim as one example, or Witcher 3. Both of those are vast open worlds. Um, but what they do is for certain characters, they have certain characters being cross-referenced by multiple other characters, right? Even if you were to take no matter how you start Skyrim, like even if you use the mod that has you start in a random place, right? It has you not go through the typical Skyrim intro cutscene. Within like the first 30 minutes, you're going to be hearing about Ulfric Stormcloak. You're going to be hearing about the conflict which that is happening. You are going to hear talk of the Greybeards, right? You're going to hear talk of Alduin. Um, in Elden Ring, there's really only a couple of characters that get that same treatment, where they are being consistently referenced by multiple other characters, and that is Ronnie, um, Mikola, and Marika are really the big three. Renala and Radagon are up there as well. Melania does as well, sort of, but not to the degree of, I think, the other five. And so, again, when I look at my first playthrough of Elden Ring and the characters that I felt the most connected to, and I feel like I understood the most, really it was those five are the ones that I understood their stories the most, because they weren't just being spoken about in their own personal quest lines, in their own bubbles. They were being spoken about by people far and wide, right? Radon is also a bit up there, but I don't think he's in the top five. I think uh, Renala gets more mention than him. Um, but yeah, then when I went through and I played it more linearly, as I have said before, as I think From Software's story design, the way they design their stories, I feel like personally benefits more a more linear world design. I found myself enjoying the game a whole lot more when I played it more linearly, and just like was like, I'm doing Frenzied Flame. We're beelining it straight. We're going straight for the capital. Like, I did Frenzied Flame in 2 streams. I did it in 2 streams. It was like 6 hours. It was a probably around 8 hours. I did the Elden Lord in 3 hours. Now, of course, New Game Plus changes this, right? But doing it through New Game Plus, I was able to focus more on what was being said and the characters, so I was able to enjoy it a whole lot more. Now, of course, for my personal tastes, I do not want to have to play games like that, especially open world games like that, in order to feel connected to the characters. That is my personal taste, but I thought it'd be nice to give that little bit of update of perspective regarding Elden Ring. And also in New Game Plus, I think I can say that I have finally I understand the appeal of the gameplay. The gameplay still is not my personal cup of tea, but I understand it now. I understand the draw of it. With all that yapping said and done, let's go ahead and dive into the lore regarding Mikola.
Mikola is many things. A fundamentalist, the unalloyed, creator of the Halig Tree, Lord of the Eclipse, Saint Trina of the Cradle Song, and not just a demigod, but a fearsome...
Wait, Mikola is also Saint Trina? Hold up, go back.
Saint Trina of the Cradle, creator of the Halig Tree, Lord of the Eclipse, Saint Trina of the Cradle Song, and...
How is he also... What? What?
Not just a demigod, but a fearsome Empyrean who has been captured but is unresponsive, for now. And after watching this video, I think you'll agree that Mikola is a topic that almost has to be explored further in some upcoming DLC. For how could they
That's funny.
not be? Their character is surely too major, too foreshadowed, and too intriguing to just ignore. So, let's learn everything that there is to know. For starters, Mikola is the demigod child of Queen Marika and King Consort Radagon, who, as I'm sure you're well aware at this point, are the same being. You can learn more about the timeline of events from my other videos, but basically, after Radagon left Renala, the Academy told Radagon to go fuck himself, basically, but Radagon took that literally, and he sired
Radagon took that literally.
A third set of demigod children all on his own, who were the twins Mikola and Melania. These children appear to be represented by the butterfly items in the game.
Oh, so they used to think Melania was the smoldering butterfly, which is but aren't they now saying that the smoldering butterfly is representative of the guy who we believe is the big bad of the upcoming DLC?
And the nascent butterfly appears to represent Mikola. Its description elaborates on his state of eternal childhood, stating that it appears as if it's just emerged from its cocoon for its entire life, Indeed, the word nascent means that something is just coming into existence and beginning to display signs of future potential. And that nascence is eternal for Mikola, and I think that this eternal nascence is incredibly important for his character. For Mikola and Melania both seem to occupy different sides of the life and death cycle. That's not to say that Mikola represents life and Melania represents death, rather, it seems like both land somewhere in the middle of each process. Melania is constantly resisting her scarlet rot and is in this perpetual state of dying, and Mikola is in this constant state of nascence. He is newly born and showing an abundance of life and burgeoning potential. Special thanks to Quelaag for making this clear to me. So Mikola is nascent, but he's also abundant, and I think that's another extremely key word for him. For example, there's this cut weapon called the Abundance and Decay Twin Blade, which symbolizes the twins and suggests that the twins were born from an inseparable fate and
So, yin and yang. That's a very yin and yang kind of design sort of going on here.
hold the runes of both abundance and decay between them. Not to mention, the word abundance is also literally spoken by Mikola in his cut content. And thanks to a very recent discovery by Sekiro Dubi, we know this cut dialogue I'm about to voice is Mikola speaking. And here, he appears to be leading you towards a unique ending for the game, and he talks about his ability to make life flourish, stating, "This is for thee, mine abundance, my drop of dew. Quench thy thirst throughout thy frame, blossom and burgeon, time and again, grow larger, stronger, until the day cometh, when thou canst share in my dream. Elden Ring, O Elden Ring, beget order most elegant from my tender reverie." And before I go on, I do want to say that Mikola talking about his abundance is cut content, and you shouldn't really take it as canon, but I think it does give us a deeper look at not only the powers that Mikola might have had, but also the world that he could create.
I think also it gives you, from a storytelling perspective, it kind of gives you the perspective, it tells you sort of what their plan kind of is regarding Mikola, because if that is cut content, then that is largely probably the characterization of Mikola that they have planned, that they wrote into the lore, right? Because cut content usually doesn't get cut. Well, it of course depends on when it gets cut, but if it's cut content that the gamers were able to find, like inside of the files or whatever of the game itself, then that, to me, I feel like is very late cut content. So what that tells me is that Mikola was more was yeah, right, was a more was definitely a very thought out character, and so they know his characterization. So I think actually looking at that cut content is actually useful in understanding Mikola, because now of course that could change, that could still change because it is cut content, but I do think for the most part that kind of does tell you the writer's sort of perspective on Mikola. Like you can get their what they want to do with him, sort of thing, if that makes sense. I don't know if that rambling makes sense.
He goes on
Makes
to
sense
say,
up to me
"If
in my
thou
head.
covetest the throne, impress my vision upon thine heart. In the new world of thy making, all things will flourish."
Oh, so there was going to be an Mikola ending. Yeah, that kind of makes sense. No, yeah, that makes a lot of sense, because also like when you look at the like there's what, one quest in the Halig tree, and that's that one redhead's quest, the one that you find in Caelid. That's like her quest takes you up there if you want to go through it. But outside of that, there really isn't anything that like the Halig tree is a pretty big area, and it has Melania. To me, my belief personally is that yeah, Mikola was cut content, and that you would have had to go to the Halig tree to get Mikola's ending. And I think Mikola's ending would have been similar to Ronnie's sort of ending, where we would have had two endings where people would really be arguing which is the gooder ending, right? Like I finishing the Frenzied Flame ending. I was like, yeah, this is the bad ending. This is the not good one. Um, and then the Elden Lord ending. I only did the endings that had achievements tied to them. Which of course then to me tells me that was From Software's. Those are From Software's big three endings that are the most closest to being canon endings. Um, the Elden Lord ending is also kind of like that's maintaining the status quo. Maintaining the status quo is never the canon ending, okay? Um, so for me, Ronnie's ending is the canon ending, but what this is giving me the vibe of, based on the cut content reveal, is that we would have discussions of Mikola versus Ronnie, which ending is the gooder ending.
Whether graceful or malign. And I love that final line. All things will flourish, whether graceful or malign. Because Mikola isn't enforcing any real notions of good or evil here. Instead, in the new world of his making, he simply wants all things to flourish. And I feel like that is a very unique viewpoint for a character in a Souls game. Not to
I wonder, because it kind of also does. It's a bit reminiscent of the same kind of goals that Ronnie has in a way. So I wonder if they cut it because they felt it overlapped too much with like the same like themes that Ronnie was, the same goals and themes that Ronnie had, and sort of like, we already are covering these same topics with Ronnie. We'll cut Mikola, right? Those are my
To mention,
guesses.
Mikola is certainly one of the few beings that is capable of creating this new world. That's because he is an Empyrean. He is one of the very few who were candidates chosen by the Two Fingers to succeed Queen Marika and become a god, to usher in a new age. Now, we could go into an entire debate about why the twins are valid Empyreans and why they were born afflicted, but honestly, that could almost be an entire video of its own, so for now I'll just give the simple answer, which is that these twins were probably valid Empyreans because they have singular parentage from a god, but that this singular parentage was probably also responsible for their afflictions as well, due to the almost incestual implications of such a thing. Why do I feel like it was George R.R. Martin that wrote this part?
Now, hold up. Actually, George wrote the pre-Shattering lore, didn't he? Like, and then everything post-Shattering is Miyazaki. Isn't that how it went? Like, he created the foundation. That's the one thing I'm so curious about. I'm curious about exactly how much George actually wrote. And I don't know if we'll ever get the fucking answer for that, man.
Anyway, let's move into the early childhood years of Mikola's eternal childhood. Mikola's early years were clearly quite inspired by their father, Radigan, who fostered a bit of a fundamentalist streak in his prodigal son, and Mikola would go on to invent fundamentalist incantations of his own, dubbed Discus of Light and Triple Rings of Light, which he gave as gifts to his father. These gifts...
But also, my guess is George probably didn't write too much. I think he probably. Oh man, it's hard. He probably created like relationships and stuff, and he was like, "This is like the family." I think itself, and then probably the drama regarding Radagon leaving Renala for Marika. Um, but honestly, I don't know. The whole like Marika and Radagon being the same person, to me that doesn't seem like a George R. R. Martin thing. But it also could be because he wrote like sci-fi and he used to write like horror. So like what he used to write before A Song of Ice and Fire tend to have those kind of weird twists, like Radagon and Marika, at least in my perspective, anyway, how I view it. Oversimplifying genre and stuff right there. Um, but I don't know. For me, it feels like the Radagon America thing is a Miyazaki twist, is a Miyazaki creation. Um, ugh. I desperately want to know what stuff is George and what stuff is Miyazaki. Like, how much is George's creation
Reveal that
ideas?
Radigan and Mikola had a good relationship, and Radigan must have been proud of his son because these two spells do represent those two key fundamentals of the Golden Order, namely that there is a law of causality, which is a branching cause and effect that goes outwards, but also that there is a law of regression, that all things yearn eternally to converge once again. And in gratitude, Radigan countered with a gift of his own, showing Mikola Radigan's Rings of Light. These incantations would go on to become core fundamentalist spells, as they are true to those two concepts that form the basis of the Golden Order. But there is another aspect of Golden Order fundamentalism, and that is the persecution of those who live in death. Hunters of these undead would attempt to stamp them out with spells such as Order's Blade and Litany of Proper Death, which deal additional damage against those who live in death and prevent them from resurrecting. To recap, those who live in death exist because of Godwyn the Golden, who was one of the early sons of Marika and Godfrey, who was eventually killed with a fragment of the Rune of Death, and then the Rune of Death would eventually spread its undeath throughout the lands between via death.
Killed by his own sister, wasn't he? Isn't that? No, no. Ronnie would have been his Godwyn. Well, they wouldn't have been related at the time because Radagon. Ronnie is a child of Radagon and Renala. Godwyn the Golden was a child of Godfrey and Marika. Yeah, they weren't related yet. Never mind.
Root.
They weren't even related.
And there is an entire debate
They were step siblings.
that we could have here about whether the persecution of those who live in death is even true to the core principles of fundamentalism. Goldmask certainly doesn't seem to think so. In fact, according to the Order healing spell, Goldmask laments the hunters of those who live in death, deeming them to be fanatics who wanted nothing more than an absolute evil to contend with. And the reason I bring up this debate at all is because you could argue that Mikola was on the side of these fanatic hunters, as he created multiple weapons that were capable of effectively slaying those who live in death. For example, this is Golden Epitaph, and it is a sword that was made to commemorate the death of Godwyn the Golden, first of the demigods to die. It is infused with the humble prayer of a young boy and reads, "O brother, Lord brother, please die a true death." So this weapon is an effective tool of killing those who live in death permanently, and clearly the young boy who created it was Mikola. We can infer this because the sigil that appears when you use this blade's skill is the Halig Tree sigil.
Yo, that's such a good shot. Whoever recorded this shot, whether it was Vati or one of the people that Vati works with, was, by the way, on the Frenzied Flame Prepare to Cry. One of the people that records like the Elden Ring like shots that we see, at least for that video. I don't know if he does it for like all of Vati's videos. Commented, he liked my reaction. That was a big boost to my ego. Yay. Anyways, so that was cool. That was really cool. I love it when that shit happens. It makes me feel good. But this is a good. That's like, hold on. We gotta look at this shot. This Holloway shot is gorgeous.
That appears when
This
you
is-
use this blade's
That's good
skill
filmmaking.
is the Halig Tree sigil, and once activated, this ability, called Last Rites, imbues the sword with a holy power that prevents those who live in death from reviving. But beyond this being a potential tool to slay those who live in death, is that this weapon points towards an early kinship between Mikola and Godwyn, a relationship that might have made it all the more painful when Godwyn's soul would perish, but his body would remain, spawning Deathroot. This is interesting, as it gives Mikola a legitimate emotional grievance against those who live in death. And it's almost a bit hypocritical, I think, for what I believe to be Mikola's character, as we previously established that he might have been this character who wants all life to flourish, but I guess that principle might not extend to those who live in death for him. This sword might not be the only representation of Miquella's relationship with Godwyn. That relationship is potentially strengthened even more when we consider this statue found in Elfale before the Halig tree. It depicts a larger figure who is clearly embracing the two Empyrean twins, Miquella and Melania, but then who is this larger figure? It could be their parent, Marika or Radagon, but then it doesn't have their signature hair braid, and instead it has this long, wavy hair.
No, yeah, that's 100% Godwyn the Golden. You kind of see that like with historical statues and stuff like that, specifically people who are kind of spoken about like and have kind of monikers in the same way of Godwyn the Golden, and just really the vibes that Godwyn the Golden gives off. You see this kind of curly hair for those kind of historical figures as well. So yeah, no, I totally believe that this is 100% Godwyn. And that would line up. That would line up with like sort of kind of the themes and storytelling, I think, purposes of Godwyn's death. And sort of like the tragedy of Godwyn dying, at least from what we are aware of Godwyn's death. From what it kind of sounds like is that Godwyn didn't like deserve to die, but Ronnie kind of had to kill him in order to get rid of like the Golden Order, right? Obviously it doesn't from the dialogue from Ronnie, from what I'm remembering, she doesn't seem to hold much remorse for having Godwyn murdered, which of course speaks to her character and whether or not like you're like, ooh, that could be problematic. You know, do you want your wife like to not hold remorse for killing someone who seemingly wasn't too bad of a person? But again, I don't know the lore too well to really say for certain.
What's more, the statue asset is flat-chested, which appears to rule out Marika, at least. And after reading a good amount of debate on
I mean, have we seen Radagon? We've all seen Radagon's pecs. He ain't flat-chested.
Line about this, I think it's a fair conclusion to say that this statue represents Godwyn, who himself does seem to have long, wavy hair.
Yep.
And this statue being enshrined here really tells a story. It's a story of two gifted but afflicted siblings who were supported by their older brother, but then they were left alone, as their older brother would become the first demigod to die. And this isn't the only statue in this location. Far more prominent in the area are these statues, which depict two siblings left alone after their brother died. There was one sibling, Miquella, who was forced to remain as a young child, and another who grew up in great pain, eventually losing vision and limbs to rot and decay. These statues are everywhere in the Halig tree, and they tell that sorrowful story. They are an early sign of Miquella's extreme empathy for his sister, and they foreshadow his desperate attempts to give her relief from her terrifying condition. And so the young Miquella abandoned fundamentalism, for it could do nothing to treat Melania's accursed rot. This was the beginning of unalloyed gold.
I am Melania, blade of Miquella. I am Melania, blade of Miquella.
So, what is unalloyed gold? Well, an alloy is something that's created when you combine metals, usually because you want to create a stronger compound at the expense of its purity. So, if we were to view Marika's Golden Order as if it were a metal, which I think is something that the lore wants you to do considering the implications of the tarnished and everything like that, then Marika's Golden Order would definitely be an alloyed metal. Just think of all the foreign powers that it's absorbed in the interest of strength. For example, Godfrey and his Crucible Knights were enlisted to devastate Marika's enemies, the ancient dragons were won over and eventually became a part of Laendel's forces, even the House of the Erd Tree and the Moon were married at one point. Literally. After all, as Muriel puts it, all things can be conjoined under the Golden Order, so I think Marika was definitely open to fusing factions and ideologies to an extent, as long as...
That's such a neat perspective. That's some neat, like, um oh, I can't think of the word. But like any conclusion. I don't know, I can't
As
think of
it
the fucking
made
word.
her treasured Golden Order alloy stronger. So, hopefully now you understand what I mean when I say that Miquella's gold is unalloyed, it is pure, it is untainted, and it is, perhaps, a singular ideology. And if you subscribe to the idea,
Which again supports the idea of they were totally having Miquella be one of another ending option in the vein of Ronnie.
that the
Totally.
cut content is still representative of Miquella, then I would say that his ideology is what I had Miquella quote earlier, that in his new world, all things should be allowed to flourish, whether graceful or malign, and that is his pure ideology. Though, of course,
Fucking
that is
ladder.
my speculation based on cut content as well, so please keep that in mind. But Miquella's unalloyed gold couldn't have just been this metaphysical concept of pure ideology, it was a physical material as well. For example, this is an unalloyed gold water lily, said to have been beloved by Miquella. This is a bewitching branch, blessed with an incantation of unalloyed gold. Unalloyed gold decorated the armor and shields of his soldiers, it was inserted into their weapons, and most importantly, perhaps, it was forged into a set of armor for his sister, Melania. Because, remember, the whole reason Miquella embraced unalloyed gold in the first place, it seems, was because he thought that it could treat his sister's accursed rot, while fundamentalism could not. And he was right, for Melania's scarlet rot is no mere disease, it's literally the divine essence of an outer god, and Melania is its vessel that will one day bloom into a true goddess. But unalloyed gold is one of the few materials in the game that can ward away such meddling of the outer gods. Another example are the mirror helms, like the one that EG wears, which literally reflects the influence of the outer gods. And personally, I think the reason that unalloyed gold inhibits the meddling of the outer gods is because it is a pure metal and potentially a pure ideology. But if that's not enough reason for you, then Quelaag actually
Oh, what the fuck is going on here?
has a great video where she breaks down potential reasons at a chemical level. But at any rate, reasons
You a fucking scientist or some shit?
aside, Miquella crafted needles of unalloyed gold, which could be inserted into the tortured flesh of one afflicted by rot to alleviate their suffering and forestall the effects of the rot. And true to the needle's descriptions, the outer god of rot isn't the only one affected by this. Our character actually uses the final version of this unalloyed gold needle to subdue the outer god of frenzy, which is something you might want if you decided to be a terrible person and burn down the world.
I did it for the achievement. I'm not a terrible person.
Anyway, when we first find Miquella's needle, it's been broken, snapped in half, and picked up by a commander at the very center of
Fuck that dude. I hated this fight. I hated this fight. Honestly, this fight pissed me off more than any other fight. I don't know why. I just hated it. I hated
the
it.
Scarlet Swamp. But once this needle has been prepared, we can give the golden needle to Millicent, proving that it does indeed work to forestall the rotting sickness, to remove pain and nightmares from the afflicted. It is, after all, lovingly crafted by Miquella himself.
Well, well, this is a marvel indeed. The work of a true artisan, a meticulous, bold craftsman who grasps the essence of life.
In crafting these needles and pursuing unalloyed gold, Miquella is attempting to save his sister from her affliction. It seems like this objectively good deed, which is a rare sight in Elden Ring, especially for a demigod, whose strengths have been known to tip them towards madness, and that is what makes Miquella such a pure and likable character in Elden Ring. So it's no wonder really that Melania venerated her brother. She is a character of undefeated prowess, and she's an Empyrean, no less. And yet, she dedicated her blade to Miquella, and Miquella alone, for she believes that he possesses the wisdom, the allure of a god, and that he is the most fearsome Empyrean of all. The story of their bond and duty to one another is legendary, and that's something that becomes quite clear when we explore Miquella's Halig tree and see these statues depicting their embrace all around. And if you were one of the many defiled outcasts in Elden Ring, you too might have felt inspired by this story, and you might have felt inclined to earn Miquella's favor and make.
I also hated this place. Those goddamn sniping mages. Jesus Christ. The invisible fuckers weren't actually that big of a problem for me. It was those sniping mages on the rooftops I hated here.
The long pilgrimage towards your salvation, towards the distant divine Halig tree and its brace that was Miquella's domain. So first, what even is the Halig tree?
Big
Well,
tree.
it's pretty obvious that it's a sort of Erd tree. For one, Erd tree avatars have clearly emerged from it, which they only do in order to protect the Erd tree's own offspring. And then there's the Halig tree knight armor, which confirms that the Halig tree ultimately failed to grow into an Erd tree. And one thing I've been wondering is, when exactly was the Halig tree planted then? If we knew when, then we might be able to guess at its purpose. Was it planted before or after the shattering of the Elden Ring? Because when the Elden Ring was shattered, golden seeds flew from the Erd tree, scattering across the various lands as if life itself knew that its end had come. These seeds create these little illusory trees and likely spawned the minor Erd trees as well, so I think it's a fair assumption that Miquella might have planted the Halig tree from an Erd tree seed.
And I think it also is indicative of him. It could also be indicative, from a storytelling perspective here, of Miquella's own desires to separate himself from, at least seemingly, separate himself from the Golden Order and forge something new and unalloyed. Am I cooking?
And if that was indeed the case, then it should have happened after the shattering, for before that, the Erd tree was considered perfect and eternal, and it wasn't even believed that Erd tree seeds could exist. But on the flip side, the golden epitaph sword that we mentioned earlier likely existed before the shattering, as it was created to commemorate Godwyn's death, and this sword displays the Halig tree sigil when its weapon art is activated, so one could infer that the Halig tree must have existed at this point too, right? So I guess it's always possible that Miquella somehow procured an Erd tree seed before the shattering, or simply grew it from his own being, as he is a scion of the Golden Bough after all. But whatever the case, Miquella clearly decided that growing such a tree was important, and he even went so far as to water it with his own blood. This confirms that the Erd tree is indeed a blood-sucking parasite. Just kidding. Sort of. I mean, you have to admit, it is pretty disturbing that an Erd tree could flourish in such a manner. But this does lead us to the final question, which is, why was the Halig tree planted? What was the point of it? And at the end of the day, the main reason is always going to be because it's like the Erd tree. It's natural to compare them, and the item descriptions seem to want you to compare them as well. The Erd tree is this enormous icon of power and faith in the lands between, so evoking that and inspiring worship is clearly a valuable thing. But the Erd tree was only really an icon of faith in its later years. Before that, it was a symbol of abundance, with light as warm as the gentle sun that could gradually heal all those who bathed in its rays. But perhaps most importantly, during this time of abundance, it would drip sacred dew, sap or tears that could bestow blessings, form crystal tears, and even be embedded into talismans. These were treasured things, and naturally, this was an extremely valuable symbol for Miquella to evoke, since he is himself associated with dew and abundance in the cut content. And his Halig tree did drip with dew. The greenish amber of the Halig tree can even be seen in cut content items. It even looks as if it's mingled with a bit of Miquella's own blood.
Yes, blood.
And
100%.
that signature green hue of Halig tree amber is also seen in the Halig tree knight sword.
Yeah, I'd say that's greenish. That's green.
Which is not a cut weapon, and this was modeled after the Carrion Knight's own swords, except it was embedded with amber from the Halig tree instead of glintstone. Okay, so the Halig tree is a great symbol of faith and power and abundance, and Mikola is related to abundance in the cut content, but what else does the Halig tree add in terms of value? Well, the Halig tree itself is something of a vessel, fit for a god. Mikola plants himself inside it later on. Melania returns home to it, and speaking of it being a home, many of the creatures have made their home within the tree, and within the brace that supports it as well. And I guess you could also argue that the Halig tree might be a sort of a tool to be used. After all, Marika puts the Erd tree to use in such a way, using its roots to absorb people after their death, and perhaps even its branches to rebirth life. And then the Erd tree is later used as a prison, with thorns that are almost entirely impenetrable. But I don't think Mikola planned to use the Halig tree in such a way. Perhaps the biggest difference between the Halig tree and the Erd tree is that the Halig tree was built in a largely inhospitable region. It is extremely difficult to reach, and unlike the Erd tree, it might not really be designed for the benefit of the vast majority of the world. As it stands, the Halig tree strikes me as being more like the Painted World from Dark Souls. It's a place for the outcasts, the heretical, and the malign, not to mention the low and the meek, who are specifically named in the description of the Sacred Crown Helm. While many of the Scarlet Rot Afflicted seem to be here because of the eventual decay of the Halig tree, I think that there are a number of refugees here that would have been here before that, namely the Misbegotten, the Crystallian, these astray mages of Raya Lucaria, and of course Loretta, who deemed this place to be a great haven for the despised Albinaurics. The second generation Albinaurics even carry a weapon called the Ivory Sickle, which reads, "These weapons are evidence of their dedication to the Halig tree, despite never having entered its presence." And we really don't find a single Albinauric within the Halig tree. I'll admit, I do find this a bit strange. You do find quite a few Albinaurics so close to the Halig tree. It's a bit strange to me they don't go just that little bit further.
They're so goofy.
The reason given for the first generation of Albinaurics not being at the Halig tree is given by Albus, who says that their faded legs are the reason for that. But yeah, we find them defending Mikola and his Halig tree all the same at the Ordina liturgical town, which takes us to the Halig tree via a puzzle within an Everjail. The word liturgical means relating to public worship, and this town is fittingly filled with many statues of Mikola sitting alone, cradling what might have become the Halig tree back when it was still just a sapling. I also find it interesting that the Halig tree is never called out as competing with the Erd tree, or never called out for housing all these undesirables. Perhaps the House of the Erd tree was happy to see ungraceful folk leave their lands. Perhaps the Halig tree was extremely well hidden from everyone and they didn't know. Or perhaps Mikola could just get away with it because he was beloved by all. For example, the Bewitching Branch is an item that you can create from Mikola's lilies, and it is blessed with an incantation of unalloyed gold and reads, "The Empyrean Mikola is loved by many people. Indeed, he has learned very well how to compel such affection." And that second part that says he has learned how to compel affection, to me,
So it could also be that he's a bit of a manipulator. But I mean, he's definitely a complex character for sure. Because I think based on what we've heard from the cut content is that he doesn't necessarily, he wants to create the Golden Order essentially, but better. Whereas Ronnie wants it destroyed. I think if I'm remembering things right. One of them, in a way, you could see it as one wanting to change the system from the inside in a way, though he's not inside the Golden Order, and then the other who wants to just destroy it. I think is kind of the perspective I'm getting here, the vibes anyway.
that's saying that Mikola is very good at knowing how to inspire others' affection to his own advantage. And nowhere is this more clear, I think, than at Castle Sol.
God, fuck that castle. If that's the castle I'm thinking of with the certain boss fight at the end, I think. Fuck that boss fight too.
This is the Halig Tree Secret Medallion. It's furnished with that signature green amber, and it features the Halig Tree in the background, for it allows you to access a secret lower level of the Grand Lift of Rold and progress through the consecrated snowfields to this sacred place. Having both halves of this secret medallion is therefore extremely desirable, for the medallion has another name. It's called Miquella's Favor.
Miquella's favor can be yours. Slaughter, slaughter, slaughter. The all-hearing slaughtered. But alas, it was for naught. But all you need do is snatch it from the big pot.
Gideon is the all-hearing man in this dialogue, and he slaughtered an entire village just for one half of this medallion, but he did not find it in Albus's possession. But you can. And the other half is at Castle Sol, right before a nameless phantom who says this: Lord Miquella, forgive me. The sun has not been swallowed. Our prayers were lacking. Your comrade remains soulless. I will never set my eyes upon it now. Your divine Halig Tree. So this phantom seemingly has, or I guess had, one half of the medallion, and yet he laments that he will now never set eyes upon the Halig Tree. To me, this suggests that Miquella might have been withholding the second half of the medallion from him, or that this phantom believed that he could solicit the second half of the medallion from Miquella and make it to the Halig Tree if he achieved his goal here at Castle Sol and basically earned Miquella's favor. But what exactly was supposed to happen here at Castle Sol? What does it mean when the phantom says, the sun has not been swallowed, our prayers were lacking, your comrade remains soulless? It means, I think, that the residents of Castle Sol and Miquella were attempting to restore the dead soul of Godwyn the Golden. And just to refresh your memory, when a fragment of the Rune of Death was used to kill Godwyn, it was also being used at the exact same time to kill Ranni, and since they perished at the same time, Ranni lost her body, and Miquella's demigod brother, Godwyn, perished in Sol alone. And despite this death seeming so
Guys, confusing. I'm confused.
final, Miquella clearly believes that some sort of ritual performed here could restore the soul of his comrade. For example, here's some more dialogue from a different phantom that reads, O great sun, frigid son of Sol, surrender yourself to the eclipse, grant life to the soulless bones. But the question is how? How does that work? How does an eclipse restore life to Godwyn? Now you can just take Miquella at face value and trust that he knows what he's doing, or we can try to learn as much as we can about the eclipse and see if we can reason out the mechanism behind this process. So at Castle Sol we find the Eclipse Shotel, which reads, Storied sword and treasure of Castle Sol that depicts an eclipsed sun drained of colour. In Sol, the sight of an eclipse inspires a dreadful awe, preventing an onlooker from averting his gaze. The most important part of this description, though, is the part that says it's the storied sword of Castle Sol, as this proves that the veneration of the eclipse here goes back a long way. But what does an eclipse represent? So, according to the Eclipse Crest shields, the eclipsed sun, drained of colour, is the protective star of soulless demigods. Honestly, I think calling it a protective star is kind of the closest we come to understanding the mechanism here, because you could reason that a protective star might be a sort of outer god that lends them power, though that is just speculation. The description goes on to say that the sun in eclipse is said to be the symbol of the wandering mausoleum where the soulless demigods slumber. So note that it says demigods plural here. Now, this could be because the wandering mausoleums come to house many demigods from a gameplay point of view, because you can take their remembrances here, but it could be a word that is slightly lost in translation, as the Japanese version of the word demigods does not specify whether it's a plural or whether it's a singular word, so my take on this is that I think the Wandering Mausoleums became necessary when Godwyn died. I think that the mausoleum was intended to be a resting place for him initially, but then also for any future demigods, as all of a sudden all of their true deaths had become possible as well, with the theft of a fragment of the Rune of Death.
Okay.
The Mausoleum Knights themselves are these headless soldiers who behead themselves, willingly following their master into death.
What
As
the
such,
fuck?
they become these headless spirits, tied to the land, so that they might better defend the walking mausoleums. They also carry eclipse-crested shields, and the eclipse is said to aid the Mausoleum Knights by keeping destined death at bay. It is their symbol, and by keeping destined death at bay, maybe it's helping to keep their souls tied to the land. We could speculate for a long time on how the eclipse has this power, and I've done my best. Maybe other people have a better take on it, and maybe you guys do in the comments, but in the end, it's simpler just to trust that Miquella knew what he was doing with the eclipse at Castle Sol, where he wanted to block out the sun and restore Godwyn's soul. All that said, we can't trust him too much, I guess, because it's important to remember that this ritual failed. According to this phantom, the sun was not swallowed. And I guess the protective star of the soulless demigods did not listen to their prayers, and it did not appear. But it is really fascinating to learn that such a thing might even be possible. That Godwyn, whose soul seems to be as dead as Rani's body, might actually not be? So if his soul is somewhere, then where has it fled to? A part of me wonders, if his soul is lost, then maybe it's lost within a dream? One theory I did come up with regarding the mechanism by which Godwyn's soul is brought back by the eclipse is that his soul might be brought back by bringing about a sort of artificial dusk with the eclipse. That's because those who live in death are called the Duskborn, after all, so there is an association between night and death, to be sure. And there's also an association between death and sleep. For example, when you pursue Fia's questline, you use her as a medium to enter Godwyn's deathbed dream, which is an entire dreamscape where the dragon Fortisax is futilely fighting against the death in his companion. And then there's Roger, who speaks this line of dialogue as he is on the precipice of succumbing to Deathroot.
Maybe I should tell you. Lately, I feel I'm on the precipice of falling into a deep, fathomless slumber.
He does say he's about to fall into sleep. So, in conclusion, a realm of death does seem accessible through dream, and I think this is the perfect time to mention that Miquella has an alter ego. Some say she is a comely young girl. Others are sure he is a boy. This is where we have to talk about the enigmatic figure named Saint Trina.
I'm confused.
Perhaps
Oh,
the
man.
biggest in-game clue about Saint Trina's true identity is Trina's lily, which bears this undeniable resemblance
It's like the only thing regarding Saint Trina, isn't it? Or did I miss stuff?
to Miquella's lily of unalloyed gold. Its description reveals that it is a symbol of faith in Saint Trina, dulls the senses, preventing agitation. Naturally, it can be used to craft a bunch of sleep-afflicting items like Saint Trina's arrow, which states that the sweet oblivion of sleep can become quite the habit, and it tells of the priests of Saint Trina who use these arrows to spread their teachings, though the Japanese description seems to specify that these were more of a tool used for their rituals. So it's largely left to your imagination as to what rituals these priests might have been performing, though I will mention that it seems Saint Trina might actually be able to be found somewhere within sleep. This is suggested by Feather's cookbook, which reads, "A record of crafting techniques left by a man who was utterly captivated by Saint Trina. He continued the search for her in his slumber." We get a side profile.
Hold on. Is the DLC going to be in a fucking sleep realm? Because you have to kill Moog, who has Miquella's slumbering body or something, right? Is that what it is? Are you Has any... Are we going into Miquella's Dream World? Is that what's gonna happen in the DLC? Because if that's the case, that's kind of cool. I kind of like that idea. If that's what's going, like that's like what if Mikola trapped? The reason Mikola isn't around in base game is because he has whatever the fuck's name is, who likes to set shit on fire in the DLC trailer. Um, whatever he is. What if he's Mikola, like essentially sacrificed himself to keep this guy trapped for reasons? That's my guess. That's my DLC guess. We're going into Dream World. We're going into Mikola's Dream World or whatever. I don't know.
File of her in the hilt of Saint Trina's sword, which hints
Imagine if I'm correct. That'd be so cool. I'm
that
probably
flowing,
not, but
astray hair that she has, and then we get a much better front-on view of this feminine adult form upon Saint Trina's torch. The carvings depict Saint Trina, but in adult form, somewhat unnervingly. The carving is indeed unnerving, and it's certainly strange considering Mikola is supposed to be eternally a child. It raises the question, what has to happen for Mikola to grow up into this? And why is this bizarre creature the adult form that he takes? Another question worth asking, I think, is whether Mikola even has total control of Saint Trina. What if he's in a similar situation to Marika Radigan, where their alter ego is an opposite of sorts, and able to act almost as if they have their own free will? So all of this is definitely a little bit of a disturbing view of what Saint Trina could be, but I guess we do have cut content that does somewhat reassure me that their alter ego is still a benevolent person. This cut content was first showcased by Sekido Dubi, and this cut content is truly ancient. It exists in one of the oldest versions of the game that we know about, so a lot has probably changed
how the fuck you get access to this shit, man?
since then, but regardless, here we can learn about St. Trina's crystal ball, which once read, "A crystal ball full of mist, symbol of St. Trina of the Cradle Song, copies dream mist from a sleeping being. Dream mist was once used as an ingredient in rare and potent physics. May the quietude of slumber come to all and sundry, even to those whose red eyes burn with the flames of frenzy." So this reveals that this cut version of St. Trina even once had sympathy for those afflicted by the flame of frenzy. They even went so far as to teach the merchants their songs.
Our song derives from an old lullaby, sung for us long ago, deep inside our tomb. But whoever it was sings no longer. Its melody allowed us to sleep, despite the cursed flame.
The description of Mikola's songs as a lullaby is referenced by the modern-day sleep pot description, which reads, "Like a lullaby or a quagmire, its light purple haze irresistibly draws its victims down into sleep. Sweet dreams." This is the closest thing we have to Dream Mist as well, which was an item that you could again once collect from sleeping enemies. And after you did this, you were supposed to sell this Dream Mist to the merchants, who used it to quell their flame of frenzy. But as the merchants once said, whoever it was that sings, now sings no longer, and this is a detail that has remained intact even in the final version of Elden Ring, with St. Trina's sword stating that St. Trina's appearance was as sudden as their disappearance. Something clearly happened to Mikola that prevented them from continuing their work as St. Trina, and that is what we will discuss next.
Gotta be the DLC shit. Gotta be. It's gotta be.
At some point, Mikola embedded himself into the Halig tree. Why he did this is never explicitly stated, but I think we can make a good attempt at puzzling it out. So, Mikola famously watered the Halig tree with his own blood, since it was a sapling, so I guess you could argue that he embedded himself in it to simply feed the tree more, which I guess is possible because the tree does eventually wither without Mikola inside it, and Gideon seems to tie his removal with the death of the Halig tree, or it turning into a husk, but I don't think that can be the only reason why he embedded himself. For instance, look closely at the Halig tree roots, and you'll see the form of a tree-like woman, and where her womb should be, there's a gap that once contained Mikola's cocoon cradled by the Halig tree. Now, either Mikola was attempting to fuse into and become this woman-like figure who might even be the adult form shown on St. Trina's torch, or there was a rebirth occurring here. This is a cocoon within a womb, after all, so rebirth could have been the intent here, but regardless, it seems things ended prematurely, for Mikola would eventually be ripped out of the womb and the Halig tree would split and decay. And so, when we arrive at the Halig tree and the town of Elfale that is built into the brace that supports it, the music here hits extremely hard. This place is just so sorrowful, for the Halig tree and Mikola's lilies and even St. Trina's lilies are all wilting, and all who live here are just hoping and praying for their lord to return. I love the little detail of the guards looking outwards and sitting dejectedly. To make matters worse for them, it was here that they realized that the sacred light inside them would explode upon their imminent deaths, and yet, in spite of this, their spirit ashes show their faith and state, "May the flash of our deaths guide Mikola's return." And Melania is here too, holding to the husk of Mikola, dreaming and waiting for Mikola to return, and believing full well that he will.
Corpse after corpse left in my wake as I awaited his return.
Melania's set reveals that she believes her brother will keep his promise. So what was that promise, I wonder? Was it merely to return, or was it something more? How much does Melania know? Why did she fight Radahn? We'll have to talk about all of that in another video. So there is still faith. There's even this one phantom in the consecrated snowfields who has somehow puzzled out who took Mikola and even where they are. He is pointed towards the portal that takes you to Mohgwyn Palace and Mohg the Omen. So, indeed, it was the demigod Mohg who somehow broke into the Halig tree and absconded with Mikola's infant form. And it's with him that this story ends. Or maybe it's where this story truly begins.
DLC.
So, if you're not familiar, Mohg is the Omen son of Godfrey and Marika, and being an Omen of royalty, he was born into a wretched mire of filth in the subterranean shunning grounds below Lanedale capital.
So
But
loved.
unlike his brother Morgoth, who reviled his accursed blood, Mohg reveled in it, and it was assumedly because of this accursed blood that he chanced a meeting with an outer god called the Mother of Truth. And as Mohg stood before her, deep underground, his accursed blood erupted with fire, and he was truly besotted with the defilement that he was born into.
Ugh.
Mohg is just one of many characters who discovers a new identity in the ways that they have been discarded by the world. And how could he not? For his defilement was validated by nothing less than an outer god. And as always, we know very little about
That's
this
a cool
outer
shot,
god.
too.
We know she is called the Mother of Truth and the Formless Mother. We know that she desires wounds and bestows power upon accursed blood. Her followers can thrust their arms into her body to scatter blood flame, and followers of Mohg can share in the Lord of Blood's power and send blood flies before them. There's even been some speculation in my recent shorts and my TikToks as well that the Formless Mother is also an outer god called the Bloodstar. But the one thing that all outer gods seem to have in common is that they all require vessels to move through. So in this case, the Formless Mother's vessel was Mohg. For example, the sacred spear that he wields is a weapon, but it's also an instrument of communion, and Mohg may well be doing her bidding with his actions. These actions included him starting a new dynasty called Mohgwyn, deep below the earth, in the grounds of these ancient dynastic remains. This is a secret place, difficult to reach, and it was here that Mohg brought the infant Mikola, torn as he was from his cocoon. I mean, that's how we see him in his opening cutscene, but in-game, Mikola seems to be back with a new cocoon here. You can even see it sat upon this giant pelvic bone, which seems to be a reference to the womb of the Halig tree woman that he was literally ripped from. and it's from the remembrance of the Bloodlord that we can learn of Mohg's intent here. He wished to raise Miquella to full godhood and become his consort, taking the role of monarch. To this end, Mohg has begun soliciting blood offerings to Miquella, and that certainly explains the state of so many who reside here.
So Mohg was just kind of one-sidedly obsessed with Miquella, that Miquella did not want it. That's
According to the Lord of Blood's exaltation talisman, he proclaimed, "Render up your offerings of blood to your lord, drench my consort's chamber, slake his cocoon's thirst. His awakening shall herald the dawn of our dynasty." And then, to return to Mohg's remembrance, it's stated that, so far, this has all been in vain, for no matter how much of his bloody bedchamber Mohg tried to share, he received no response from the young Empyrean. So maybe nothing will happen. Or maybe, according to the Pure Blood Knight's medal, it is not yet time, for Mohg yet slumbers beside the divinity. Be patient, the new dynasty is nigh. What do you think? I mean, it's
I
kind
don't
of
know
hard
what
to
to
know.
think, man.
Even
You tell
Gideon
me.
has no clue. But something does seem to be happening to Miquella in there. He has clearly grown, for one, since being taken, so maybe his adult form is manifesting? And personally, and this is really speculation, but this reminds me a lot of Berserk, which we know Miyazaki is always inspired by. Spoiler warning, really, you should watch that show, but there's this moment at the very end of the first chapter where Griffith betrays his companions in this sacrificial ceremony of carnage and bloodshed in order to be inaugurated and reborn as a god within an egg of sorts. This really reminds me of that. It also reminds me of a scene with Griffith where he allows himself to be abused, basically, in order to get what he wants. So I wonder, what if this was also what Miquella wanted? We know that he is extremely proficient at compelling others to love him, and Mohg is clearly enraptured. We
True.
know that Miquella is an Empyrean prodigy, and we know that his sister, who knows him best, has total faith that he will return. So you'd think he's still in control of the situation somehow, but that could be a part of the tragedy, and Miquella, this benevolent being, might not have predicted this at all, and is now being completely taken advantage of. Or maybe he did intend to be taken, but he's going to get more than he bargained for with the Mother of Truth. Or maybe Miquella's fate really is long gone. There's one other thing I want to mention. There is this place called Miquella's Hideaway in the Altus Plateau, and here we can loot Amber Starlight, which Celovus mentions is the very fate of a demigod. Clearly, since it's here, you'd think it's Miquella's fate, right? And then you also have to consider that the cut content that we are basing so much of this video on is very much removed from the game, because it might not fit the developer's intent. That's always possible. So I really do hope you all bear that in mind, as I would really hate to promote ideas that are against the developer's vision for this character. But I really do think that it's a possibility that we're going to one day enter.
I think it could be, I don't know, just the vibes that I get. My personal perspective here is that it is, I think, more likely than not, their intention, and it was cut because they couldn't, either it was too much and they felt that it was, like, where they felt Miquella's story would take them would clash too much with, like, the setting of Elden Ring, and so, which is why it is being moved to DLC. And also, as I said earlier, could also clash if they were to give Miquella an ending similar in vein to, like, Ronnie and stuff like that, or Elden Lord or Frenzied Flame, that sort of thing, that Miquella's ending is too similar to, like, Ronnie's ending or whatever. And so, like, game devs and storytellers tend to try to avoid those sort of things in general. Having two options that are essentially like the same thing, but just with a different character, isn't, like, the most compelling sort of thing, you know? I mean, they could have felt that. Those are my guesses right now. Obviously, I think we'll get a better idea as to whether or not their intent with Miquella lines up with the cut content here when the DLC comes out, or if Mikola is completely different from what we can gather from the cut content.
To the dream of this slumbering demigod. After all, there was once a cut character called Rico who was supposed to say the following, standing before Mikola's cocoon at Mogwin Palace. He says, "Finally, I have found it. St. Trina's, no, Lord Mikola's cadaver, such that I may aid you, O Lord. So please, I hope you welcome your humble servant Rico into your dream, the world of your heart. Indeed, I beg you grant my wish."
Again, I'm still believing because we've been told that, like, what, Saint Trina is gonna be in the DLC, Mikola's gonna be in the DLC. You have to beat Mog to access the DLC. We're totally going to a dream world. I am dead set that we are going into a dream
That
world.
when you transcend from Empyrean to God, allow me a place by your side. Plus, if we do get DLC, it's going to need a new Great Rune to acquire, right? That's a huge gameplay mechanic in these games, and it'd be weird if DLC came and you couldn't get more Great Runes. Apart from Mikola's Great Rune, the only one we don't know about also is Rani's Great Rune, which was allegedly cast aside. So there's always that to consider. But hopefully we get some DLC to answer these questions, or more likely we'll get DLC that will give us more questions than we started with.
Probably
That's
more questions.
always
too.
how it seems to go. But I really hope they throw us some good curveballs with this one, as they always do. But regardless, it's always a ton of fun to speculate with you all, so if you're still listening to this extremely long video, thank you for giving me your time today.
And I added, what was this, 20-some minutes, a little over 20 minutes. Whew, this was a long video. I did not, oh man, this was a good one though. Yeah, I love Vati's videos. Literally, they're great. They're fantastic. He's good at storytelling. He's good at speaking words good. And I really like how he explains things. His way of explanation is accessible for me. Like, I'm able to really understand what he says. Just the way he phrases things works real well for me, and the examples that he provides, and then how he interconnects it all to like help you make sense of it. I think he does a great job with that. And that was the lore of Elden Ring's Slumbering Demigod by Vati. I hope you guys enjoyed as well. Remember to hit that like button and subscribe for more, and I will see you guys in the next video. Peace.